Alright, welcome to the next daily drawing. Today we're going to be drawing an octopus. I think that's what this is. It's pretty cute though. Alright, so the first thing we're going to notice is that the head, ignoring the fact that there's like the bumps for the eyes, the head is kind of an ovally egg shape, and it also has this kind of curtain that comes down from it that then turns into the tentacles. So the first thing we're going to start with is we're going to start with that head. So I'm going to start with drawing kind of an ovally shape that is tilted backwards like this. So they've got really large parts to the back of their head, so that's why it's so kind of curved like this. Now I do notice that the arms are going to go in front of it. I'm going to go ahead and draw the full size of the head for now. That way it makes it easier to connect that together. Alright, so once I have my some kind of head part drawn, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the skirt that's coming down. Now if you kind of flip it upside down, it kind of looks like a weird W-ish shape with like an extra bump on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start here on the top. I'm going to curve it down into kind of a parenthesis like this, just until it gets a little bit past here. And then once I get to this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the wonk. I'm going to then curve it into a parenthesis facing the opposite way. So it's going to create a little bit of a bump here. So if you look at it like this, you have a parenthesis on this side, and then it turns into an opposite parenthesis to add that wonk. And then what I want to do is I want to drop that down and flip it the opposite way like this. So we get this way, and then this way. That way you get a nice gentle curve to it. You don't want there to be any like sharp points because they're very kind of soft looking. Alright, so I'm going to leave this open for now. What I want to do next is I'm going to go ahead and do the other side before I draw the kind of W shapes in the middle. So I'll notice that this right here in about the center of the head is where we're going to have that second part of the skirt come out. And then I think that's its ear of sorts or something. I don't know, some sort of little knob thing that you can actually see on both sides. So about halfway in the head, I'm going to start maybe right here-ish, just kind of across from where my other leg part was starting, so right about there. So I'm just going to put a marker dot so I know where I'm starting. And then I'm just going to add a kind of a parenthesis going in this direction. And then I want to do the kind of same thing that I did here is I'm going to add that wonk. So after you do the parenthesis, I would suggest maybe go a little bit outside of the head just to give it a little bit more space. And then you're just going to frown that down like this. And you don't have to go very far because we're going to turn that into the tentacles here in a second. Alright, so now that I have the kind of skirt of the octopus kind of sketched out, now what I can do is I can start drawing the tentacles on the inside. This is where you get to have a lot of fun with it. So it kind of depends on what you're going for. So I'm going to keep it kind of similar to the picture, but you can definitely feel free to twist it in any direction that you want. So I'm going to start off with this tentacle right here. So notice that it kind of starts off really wide and then it slowly gets thinner and thinner to the point where it gets to the tip that it's very small. Okay, so what I would suggest starting with is draw very lightly because you want to be able to erase it. I would just very lightly draw the direction that you want the tentacle to go. So I would start it somewhere across from where we started the initial part of the skirt. I would start with drawing just a little spirally line, however big that you want the tentacle to be, like this. So this is going to be the inner line. Then what I would suggest doing is after you draw the shape that you want your tentacle, remember this can go however big or small or whatever direction that you want it to. Then what I would do is I'd actually start at the tip of the tentacle first. So here we have, I'm just going to cap it with a small frown, like this. And then I'm going to kind of outline very carefully and slowly around the shape of the tentacle. Be careful not to make it get too wide or too thin in any particular area. And then what I'm going to do, I noticed that we can actually see the bottom of the tentacle kind of overlaps behind the skirt. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually, whenever I get close to that part, I'm going to actually touch my original line like this. That's just going to make it look as though it is flipped upwards so that you can see the bottom of the tentacle instead of the top of it. Alright, so now that I got my first initial spiral, then what I want to do to help make it look like I can see the inside of the leg is, if you'll notice right here, we can see that darker part starting a little bit halfway up here, and then it's going to curve going outwards to make this part get really wide. So to do that, I'm just going to go below my little spiral here, right about here on this tentacle that I just drew, and then I'm just going to draw a curve going up. It's okay if it overlaps behind the other one. If it does, what I would suggest is kind of pretend that you're drawing and then continue on the other side. And then just go up however far you want to go for that particular part of the tentacle. So whenever I go to draw this to make it a little darker, so I'd keep this line that you just drew, because that one's pretty confident. And then I would go ahead and outline this outer part. However, very important, once you get to this part where we have overlapped the tentacle, what you want to do is you want to make this actually get wider, so you're not going to follow this line up how you did originally. You're actually going to make this get a lot wider at this part, because this is where the skirt's starting to expand. So here you can see that the skirt has gotten wider right here, so as soon as you get to that overlap, it just kind of goes off in a parenthesis in the other direction. So here I'm going to carry this overlap like this, and then make a slight frown or a slight parenthesis to add a little curve there. Afterwards, what I would strongly suggest is immediately erase this extra line, because you don't want to keep too many extra lines, especially since these things have like 8 legs. It's going to get really confusing if you don't erase as you go. So here I have my first one drawn, which we'll draw the sucker cups later. We want to go ahead and get all the legs first. All right. Because the tentacles go on all sides of the body, not just the front, you're not going to see all 8 legs, like the start of them. You're only going to see like maybe like 4 or 5. So in this particular picture, I see 1, 2, 3, 4 parts, and then you can kind of see the other parts overlapping behind the body. So it's very important and helpful if you draw the ones in the front first, and then draw the ones that go behind it. So the next one I'm going to draw is I'm actually going to draw this one right here. On this particular picture, it kind of whips out to the front. You can do it in any direction you want to, though. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start here at the bottom of the skirt, and then I'm just going to draw a diagonal line, because that's the direction that it looks like it's going. And then once I get to the part where I want the whip action, what I would do is I would start curving it in a parenthesis, and then just allow it to overlap itself. So as I just mentioned before, it's really helpful if you draw the stuff in front and then the stuff in back. So this part of the tentacle is actually in front. So what I would do is I'm actually going to draw this part first and then overlap it. So I'm going to start very similar to how I did before. I'm just going to do a small frown at the tip of the tentacle, and then I'm going to follow it really narrow and then allow it to slowly get a little bit wider. And then once I get to where I want the end of that tentacle, I'm just going to curve it like this. So this is that kind of the bottom of the tentacle exposed, and this is going to be the top of the tentacle. So after I have connected it to that previous line so that I get my overlap, then what I'm going to do is very similar to how we did here. We don't start at the same spot. We're going to go in a little bit. You're going to go in just a little bit on the inside of the leg, and we're just going to curve it, jump over it, and then you're just going to continue it until you get to where you want the other part to be. So remember, this part's very important. Keep this very wide, because that's the skirt part. So after I get to where I want the ending of the skirt part, I'm going to actually frown it down. Now this is actually working out really nicely for my drawing, because it's actually going to go ahead and make the other part of the leg, so you can actually go ahead and continue that down until you get to where you want the other tentacle leg to be. So yours may not have worked out that way. If it didn't, don't panic. Just do it your own pace. You can erase things and move things around if you want to. So here I'm actually going to go ahead and, before I move on to this one, I'm going to go ahead and erase this extra line so I don't forget to do that later. Alright, so now I can actually see this one's very similarly drawn to this one. It's just going to have that kind of whipping motion. And of course you can change it. So like say if I wanted to have a spiral instead, you can change it. Just pick a side of the leg, and you can just draw whatever shape you want the leg to be, and then carry it back out. So here I have it kind of a little bit more of a curl to it, just to make it look a little bit more interesting. You can also kind of go behind the leg instead of keeping it in front, so you don't have to do this, I'm just doing this to show you. But if you want to kind of go like this so that it goes behind the leg, you can. And that can make it look a little bit more interesting. Just very important, don't forget to add that kind of overlap where it's going behind the other part. So in this particular case, I would add a curve here so that this is the bottom part where you'd see the suckers, and this is the top part where you would not. Alright, so I'm starting to like the look of this. It's got some good curves for the skirt part, and it's got some good curves for the tentacles, so I'm going to leave those 3 as is. On this one right here, it's a little bit more complicated because it's actually overlapping behind the body, so I don't see the end of the tentacle. I just see kind of like the nub that makes up this part. If you want to go ahead and draw it out so that you do see the end, you can. I'm just going to draw it like this so that you can see how you would do that. Alright, so all I'm going to do is I'm just going to continue on this line until I get to where I want that part that's kind of curved and overlapping itself. And then I'm just going to cap it off with a wider parenthesis than what I've been doing. Then I'm just going to curve it back up. Now mine's being overlapped, so I'm just going to pretend to draw through here and then continue it on the other side. And then, very important, notice that I'm connecting it to the skirt a little lower than what this one is. That's going to help make it look like it's behind this leg so that we get a nice overlap. And something that I didn't point out over here that I could go ahead and point out to you, there are some wrinkles right here showing you where the muscles of the skirt is. The way that octopus's legs work is that you have like tentacles coming out like this, and then you have kind of like this little flap, like a webbing almost, in between the tentacles, kind of like frog toes and stuff. Or like we even have a little bit of webbing here that just helps them whenever they're swimming. Whenever they swim, they kind of open up the kind of like tentacles and they shut them really quick. And this traps that water in them to allow them to move forward and propel themselves. So I can see that little flap thing right here, where I can see the tentacles kind of like are muscly, so they're sticking out a little bit. So if I wanted to draw that as just a little extra detail, I would just draw kind of like a big frowny face that's stretched out and kind of connecting this together, but really lightly. And if you want to erase parts of it, you can, so it's not super obvious, but that kind of helps you show where that particular part is. And you can add that in other areas too if you want to. All right, so now I have 4 tentacles drawn, but octopuses have octopi, plural form. Anyway, they have 8 legs. And by the way, like I mentioned before, if you want to draw where you think the other tentacle would go on this leg, you can. That's kind of up to you. Just make sure that it feels like it would naturally flow in that direction. So this right here would be an okay-ish area if I wanted to add it, but I'm just going to leave it off personally, but you can add it if you want to. That's up to you. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the other legs, and this you can actually draw in any direction that you want. So actually, this is bothering. I'm going to go ahead and draw kind of like a tentacle going out this way, because otherwise it feels a little awkward being so nubby. All right, so you can draw the other legs going in any direction you want. You can have them going down like it is in this picture. I'm just going to draw them randomly just so that I can have a little bit of fun with it. So key thing is that you just want to make sure that you can still count out 8. So here I have 4. Then all you'd have to do is you're just going to start somewhere, and then you're just going to draw a line going in whatever direction you want that tentacle to go. And then once you get to the end of it, you're just going to do a little smile, connect it back up to the body. And you can add the little overlaps that we had before, or you can leave them open. It's kind of up to you. Just remember, whenever you want to add an overlap, just start on one side of the tentacle, kind of make a frown or a parenthesis, and connect it to the other side of the tentacle. And then that allows you to see which parts are which. All right, so here I'm going to add another one. We're going to go, say, down here is where I'm going to put it. So in which this one, you don't have to follow me exactly. You can put them anywhere you want to. I'm just kind of having fun with it and just drawing them wherever I want to put them. And by the way, you can add some little wonky overlaps. That always makes it kind of fun and interesting. The more overlaps that you add, it makes it just a little bit more dynamic and a little funner to draw. All right, so here I have, oh, how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, no, I need 2 more. So I'm going to do one here just to make it interesting. And notice that all I'm doing is I'm just, after I touch a line, I just kind of jump over it and go in another direction. That way I don't accidentally add too many overlaps and stuff to it. Alright, so there's another one, and then I'm going to have one more. I'm actually going to have it come out the top area right here. Just add a little bit more variation. And just be careful not to get lost in what direction that you're going, because that is very easy to do, especially when you're drawing so many legs all at once. So, but have fun with it and kind of experiment and see which directions that you want to take yours to go. Alright, so that one might be a little bit big, but that's okay. It's pretty fun. Okay, so now that I have all 8 of the tentacles drawn, now I can go back and add a little bit of detail or take away some detail. So something that I noticed on the tentacle parts is that I need to add the sucker cups. All they are is they're just basically going to be kind of like little ovally shapes. If you get to like the edge of a tentacle, you might have like little rectangle shapes coming off the sides of it like this, so that it makes it kind of look like the sucker cups on the, I was supposed to call it jellyfish, on the octopus's legs. So here I notice that they're going to be on the sides of the body, so I'm just going to draw, usually it's in a set of 2 to where you have them kind of really close together. And if you're going for more of a cartoony aesthetic and you don't want to draw these, you don't have to. This is entirely up to you. So, and very important to note is that you only draw on the side that's like the bottom side of the tentacle. You don't draw it on the top part. So like right here, I wouldn't draw it, but I would see it on this particular part right here. So I'm going to draw little squares. And then as you get closer to the kind of inside, you can start switching those squares into little circle-y shapes. And as they get closer to the tip of the tentacle, they're going to get really, really small. So the further the closer they are to the body, the bigger they are. The further away from the body, the smaller they are. Like this. All right, so kind of had fun with it. Just pace yourself. Just remember that whenever you get to this little overlap part, that one side is going to have the little tentacle-y things and the other side will not. Be careful not to go too crazy. It is kind of easy to kind of have a little bit too much fun with it, and then you end up with like a million different details that gets a little bit confusing. But yeah, so here I'm just adding some more of those little tentacly things. Now, because this leg is on the opposite side of the body, instead of having this overlap be the part with the tentacle sucker thingies, they would be kind of like on this side of the body. So really kind of think about it as you are drawing it so that you don't get confused on that particular part. All right, so I think this part right here would have them, yeah, because it's on the other side of the body. Okay, this one's on, okay, so front of the leg, back of the leg, yes. And if you'll notice that the parts that you kind of draw more square-like, those are usually the parts that you're kind of first starting out with drawing them because you're seeing them on the side of the body. But kind of like experiment and figure out which side that you want to have the sucker cups kind of like more twisted. So like if it's twisted in this direction, I might draw like the first layer a little bit more overlapped, just to make it more interesting looking. And that's just entirely on you of which side that you want to put them on. Okay, so I'm pretty satisfied with this. I like the look of it, so I'm going to leave the tentacles alone now. You can go back and add more detail, of course, if you want to. I saw that I forgot these parts right here. All right, now for the head, I noticed, one thing I noticed is that I might have made this a little bit too high up, so if I was going for realism, I would want to kind of shorten that just a little bit, but if you're going for a cartoony aesthetic, or if you just happen to like the way it looks, you don't have to change that. I'm just going to change it for my own sake, because it's going to bother me if I don't. All right, so here I have the curve that I had initially drawn, and then we got the back of the skull. What we want to do now is we want to go ahead and add the eyes. So what I would suggest doing is go ahead and draw the bumps that go above the eyes and then draw the eyes on the inside. So they're essentially kind of how we drew the sucker cups, is that it's just going to be kind of like a curvy rectangle, almost like a gumdrop shape like this. So what I would do is I'd start on the top of the head right here. I'm going to first start with a parenthesis that's kind of curving upwards, however tall you want it to go up. And then I'm going to cap it off with a frown, like this. So parenthesis, frown, and then I'm going to then do another parenthesis to connect it back together. After you have drawn those initial shapes, you can erase the inside of the head so that we can actually see the bump up that makes up that shape. And then I don't see the actual eye because it's on the other side of the head. I just see this bump that makes up the eyebrow area. But I do see the eye over here, but the eyebrow bump is still there as well. So before you draw the eye, I would suggest go ahead and draw kind of another frown like this for the bump of this particular eye. And keep in mind, however big this is, this shouldn't be too much bigger, so don't make it like massive or anything. Kind of figure out how big that you need that to be so that it doesn't look too out of place. And then afterwards, you can just draw a simple circle for the actual eye itself. And then are their pupils rectangles? I think they are. Don't quote me on that. You might need to look that up yourself. But I think that they're rectangle-y shape instead of circle, which is interesting. But double check that before you commit to that if you're going for realism. Alright, so after I've drawn the eye, I noticed something that I forgot right here. This the skirt kind of overlaps into the head a little bit, so that's why I'm adding this line. You don't necessarily have to. I just think it looks more interesting with that line there. Alright, so now that we got the eyeball, we got the iris or pupil or whatever, we got the skirt extending into the head, the last thing that we really got to add is just the kind of node-looking things that are on the sides of the head. I don't know if those are ears or not. I have no idea about the anatomy of an octopus, but all I'm doing is I'm just drawing kind of like a greater than less than sign that's just kind of like more curvy rather than pointy. So that's going to go on this side of the head, and then on this side of the head, notice that it's right behind the skirt. It's just going to be an oval with another oval on the inside right here. So just kind of an ovally shape. Just extending that skirt line into an ovally egg shape. And then I'm just going to draw another circle on the inside. I'm just going to fill it in like this. All right. So the last thing you got to do really is just erase the guidelines that you don't need. So like we don't need this inner egg shape because that's where our skirt's connected. And actually that turned out a lot better than I thought. So that's pretty cool. All right. So last thing that I'm just going to add is I'm going to add a little bit of shading. So once again, you can add some colors and stuff to it. And whenever it comes to the shading part, really pay attention to which, if you are shading it, that is, really pay attention to which tentacle you're on. I would strongly suggest shading the tentacles that are on the back a little bit darker than the ones that are on the front, especially since there's so much going on in the picture. If you don't separate out the tentacles, it makes it a little bit hard to tell what part of the body that you're looking at. So if you kind of shade those tentacles that are further in the back, or if you color them a slightly darker color, it really just helps the viewer of your artwork to understand what they're looking at a lot better. Because whenever you have this much overlap, it does get a little bit confusing. So that can be very beneficial to both you as the artist and to your viewer as well. So I'm just shading just a couple other parts that I think would benefit from having a little bit of a darker area. And I think that looks pretty okay. All right, so I'm going to call that done. You can, of course, add like details and stuff into the background or whatever. Just have fun with it. And yeah, so I would love to see what position you guys chose for your legs and stuff of your octopus. I hope you had fun and have a good day. Thanks. Bye.